In this sort of tutorial walkthrough, demonstration, modeling, training thing, we're going to be taking a look at a tooth. We're going to be modeling a tooth first because it's a relatively simple object, but in some ways it's deceptively simple. It's actually got quite a few interesting features going on. So if you put your tongue on the top row of your teeth, and then work over to the left side, so the top left, and you find your canine, which is the big pointy one. So if you've got your tongue on your canine, your upper left canine, go back one more tooth, and that's your maxillary, which is your top side, left first premolar. Okay, so that's the object that we're going to be dealing with, the maxillary top left premolar. Now, when you're a dentist, you have to become very familiar with the specific aspects of each individual tooth. And because we're science communicators and we're concerned with accuracy and detail and scientific factual information, we want to also make sure that we're dealing with specific features of whatever we're actually creating. So in this case, I've got this start file for you, and it's got some reference, and I've already lined it all up for you. I've lined up this sort of illustrated version of the tooth, but we also have a line drawing, which is helpful, and then a grid over top of another a grayscale illustration, I think. And I've done the measurements for you. I've got this measurement group here, and so since we've lined that all up to real world scale, I can hit H to hide that and get that out of the way. Now, when I was doing a little bit of research for this tutorial, I'm going to turn off the grid as well, I realized that I had to get a little bit familiar with some of the anatomy here, which is something that we don't always, or in this program, we don't familiarize ourselves with dental anatomy so much. So I was fortunate enough to find this annotated PDF by this gentleman, Cliff Lee, and there's a YouTube video that is associated with this one that I found that was very instructive for me to understand the anatomy of this maxillary first premolar. So the first thing that we need to do in order to model this effectively is get an understanding of the orientation that we're dealing with. So they're using the similar images here, and they've got notes drawn over and a heck of a lot of anatomy that we'll get to later on. But the first things that I want to talk about are the anatomical orientations. With dental anatomy, they don't use the same terms that we're familiar with. They don't use superior, inferior, posterior, anterior, those terms. They use terms that are relative to features in the mouth. And that kind of makes sense. So because we're dealing with a tooth, a maxillary tooth, we've got the crown of the tooth at the bottom, and we've got the roots sticking up into the sky. The roots are sticking up into the maxilla. And we're also dealing with the left tooth, so we might imagine that the cheek is over here and the tongue is over here. And the names for the cheek and the tongue are the buccal and the lingual side. So when we talk about buccal and lingual, we're talking about buccal, meaning cheek, and lingual meaning tongue. So I might, in fact, draw out, and let's just make sure that I'm doing this correctly, so that this image plane here is being viewed from the lingual side. So that means the tongue is over here. So I'm actually going to, this is just for demonstration purposes. Okay, this is a horrible drawing of teeth, right? So you've got your maxilla here, and your jaw on the lower side. You've got your cheek over here, and you've got your tongue sticking out into the middle. So when we're viewing the tooth from this side, we're viewing the lingual side, and if we're viewing the tooth from this side, we're viewing it from the buccal side, right? Because we're basically sitting inside the cheek looking at the tooth. Okay, so now the front and the back are also different. We've got the mesial and the distal. So if we're looking at it from the mesial side, that means we're sitting towards the front of the teeth, and we're looking at it this way. So this is a mesial view. And if we're looking from the back, then we're looking at the distal side. So I've set up these image planes so that we've got a mesial side. You can see mesial. We've got a lingual. And then we've also got what's essentially the top of your tooth, or the part of the tooth that the teeth encounter and the food encounters, and that's the occlusal side. So this is the occlusal view of the tooth, and this is really where most of the anatomy is defined, and I'm assuming that's because that's what dentists are concerned with, because that's all of the anatomy or much of the anatomy that gets involved in dentistry, and where the problems you can run into problems with. Okay, so in addition to the lingual, mesial, and the occlusal views that are being shown in the perspective view, we've also got the distal view that I've hidden, but it's only looking through the back camera. So right, that's looking at the distal view. And we've also got the buccal view, which the image plane is there. So maybe the first thing to note here is that there are two cusps to this tooth. We've got the lingual cusp and the buccal cusp, and the buccal cusp comes more occlusally. It's taller, and the lingual cusp is shorter. So when we look at this top view, we've got the buccal cusp and the lingual cusp. And this isn't meant to be a dentistry course, but I'm trying to help you understand the features of this that we're going to have to take into consideration when we're approaching our topology and as we kind of tackle this object. It's tempting to just dive in and start shaping it to how we want or how we think it looks like in the images, but if we understand the features, that's going to be a lot better in the long run. So we've got two roots, and the roots kind of lie in the same plane as the cusps. And the occlusal face has a lot of interesting sort of nooks and crannies and features that you can kind of feel with your tongue on the first premolar there that we're going to be dealing with later on as well. Okay, so that's a little bit of orientation into the reference that we're using and the orientation and the axes, and so you have an idea of which sides we're looking at, as well as some of the features of this tooth that we're going to have to model. To start off with, we're doing box modeling, so I'm going to create a cube just with shift right mouse down to polycube, and we're just going to start with a plain old vanilla polygon cube. Now, when we're modeling this, we want to be able to be using the views appropriately. So what I'm actually going to do is, right now I've just got if I hit spacebar, you can see that we're not in the 4 view. You might have the 4 view set up, but I don't because of my setup. So in order to make sure that we've got that, we want to go Panels, Saved Layouts, 4 view, so that we've got perspective, top, front, and side. And I'm also going to bring up the outliner to be a help here for us. Now, side, what does side mean? That's not really very helpful for us. What we want is the anatomical views that we have already been discussing. So this bottom camera here, we're going to rename this occlusal. Okay, so I've just selected the camera that represented the bottom orthogonal plane, and I created that ahead of time. I created a new camera, which you can do by going Panels, Orthographic, New, and then Bottom. Okay, because I want a camera at the bottom looking up at the occlusal side of this tooth. And likewise, instead of looking at this top view, I want to look at the occlusal side. Okay. So this top view, we've changed from top to occlusal. How about the front view? Well, what's the front view? Well, that's actually the mesial view. And if I try to rename this mesial, it's going to throw an error and says you cannot rename a read-only node. Well, okay, no matter. We can always create a new front camera. So I'm going to go Panels, Orthographic, New, Front. And what that's done is create a camera called Front 1. It's a new camera. And this one we can name mesial. And I can sort of sort my outliner a little bit better by middle mouse dragging the camera with the rest of the cameras. Middle mouse dragging in the outliner just sort of you can do to rearrange, and you can also use that to parent various objects to each other. Okay, so now, again, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but I've got a little bit of text at the bottom of my panel that says mesial. And so whenever I go into that view, I know that I'm looking at the mesial view of the tooth, and it will help me get oriented a lot quicker. So we should have this image plane sitting behind the cube, and that's one is mesial. Okay, what about this side view? Well, side view doesn't really help me at all. I want this to be called the lingual view. And so instead of changing the side view, I'm actually going to change the left camera. That's another one that I created. The left camera, because if you look at your perspective view, it's kind of looking at the left side of this tooth. So I'm going to call that lingual. And I'm also going to change this panel to be the lingual camera. Okay, so I've got a perspective view, and I've got an occlusal view, a mesial view, and a lingual view. And we should be seeing, with the lingual view, you can see the lingual cusp, and we can also see the buccal cusp, which is larger, that's sitting behind it. Because the cube is blocking the reference, I also want to turn on X-ray mode. So X-ray mode, because of my limited viewport size, is hidden a little bit. It's this little 2 square icon here, X-ray, so you can click on that. Because it's hidden, I kind of had to expand it out. Or you can just go shading and X-ray. That'll do the same thing. So I'm gonna do that on the orthographic views, so that we can both see the geometry and also see the image planes behind it. We've done that before. So the reason why I've spent so much time with this kind of explanation and setup is because the more organized you are and the better you set yourself up before you actually start modeling anything, the higher your success is going to be. So now that we've actually spent some time getting all these image planes set up, it's all set to scale, we've got our cameras named properly, we've got our panels organized so that we can understand the views. Now we can actually get to modeling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a single division in this sort of across the buccal lingual axis, so in this axis here. And because even though it's not perfectly symmetrical, this tooth is roughly symmetrical. So I'm going to use Shift right mouse to get into the multi-cut tool. And I'm going to hold down Control to get the insert edge loop function active, holding down the Control key. And if I middle mouse click, then it's going to create a division exactly halfway across that cube. Now obviously there are other ways, perhaps quicker ways to create a single division in a cube that we've looked at before, but this is perhaps a new way, and it will suit our purposes. Now, at the beginning of organic modeling, we want to be just getting a rough sense of the shape. So just roughly getting the proportions. We really have next to no geometry and resolution to work with, but all we want to do is just sort of line these things up. So I'm going to line this row of vertices up with the bottom of the root. I don't know if this is the fork in the roots or something like that. And I'm going to line this row of vertices up with this, the cemento-enamel junction. Basically, the junction between the white part of the tooth and this kind of orangey part of the tooth. Those are not technical terms. That's why they call it the cemento-enamel junction. And I'm going to take these side vertices and sort of line them roughly up with the edge of the tooth here. And I can hit spacebar and come into the side view. Sorry, not the side view, the lingual view. And I can do likewise, sort of bring these in, and I can bring these in here. Okay, so in a perspective view, it's just a pretty basic, blocky, slightly modified cube. I'll say it again, it's very important to work low resolution and when you're in blocking mode before you're getting into the details. You're not worried about details at this point. So now I want to bring out these two roots, and we have a decision to make. We could either just take these two faces, and I'll just demonstrate this option first. Going into extrude face, and then with the keep faces together turned off, we could bring these up and scale them in. So notice what that'll do. So that looks like that'll work okay for us because we're creating two separate areas that are going to become our roots. But the other thing that it does is it changes our topology in a way that we have a pole here and a pole on the other side. And so if we wanted to add, think about, if we wanted to add resolution into this, into the sort of branching point, there is no edge loop that we could insert that would allow us to do that, because either the edge loop would flow up to this one root or flow up to the other root, and nothing would be terminated in the middle here. So instead of doing it this way, I want to make sure that I undo enough so that I'm completely undoing that extrude operation and not just undoing it so that there's faces sitting on each other. So I'll just click that face and move it around to make sure that I've undone that operation completely. Okay. So instead of just bringing out these two faces at the beginning, what I think I want to do is with the insert edge loop tool, and again I'm just getting that by shift right clicking, getting the insert edge loop tool. Alternately, if you prefer, is the insert edge loop tool up here somewhere? No, it seems like they've made a glaring omission and not included an insert edge loop icon by default, but you can always do the mesh tools insert edge loop if you find that's faster, or you can add one to your shelf by control shift clicking, no, command shift clicking. Adding things to your shelf is by command shift clicking on a command, and then that pops up there. Anyways, that's a bit of an aside. Okay, so regardless, we've got our insert edge loop tool. I'm going to add one pretty close to this middle edge and the other one pretty close to the middle edge as well. Now that we've got some extra resolution here, we can select the outside faces and extrude them up. And I can jump over into my Mesial View and scale them in, and then I can go into Vertex Mode and move them over, sort of scale them in. Again, just roughly blocking out the general shape here. And in the side view, we can select all those and scale them in. Maybe move them a little bit. So see what's happened here. We still have the area to develop the roots, but we also have this extra resolution in the middle such that we can modify this area and even add in more resolution here if we so need. Okay? So that's a decision that we've made with the topology. We still have poles here because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This vertex is a pole and this vertex is a pole. But that's kind of a reasonable area for a pole to exist in because we've got this sort of branching geometry happening here. So that's a decision about topology that I've made. And in Vertex Mode, we can kind of, again, it's important not to get too precious about exactly getting all of the shapes right, because we're so low resolution at this point that we're going to spend a lot much more time in the future once we've actually defined our topology better, and we'll spend a little bit more time shaping. So at this point, we're just trying to block out the rough shapes. So Now we're going to be adding the cusps, just generally speaking. So basically, if we look at our mesial view, we want, there's this whole area is kind of a single unified area, and it's only at this point down here that the cusps diverge. So we're going to select all of these faces, and again, we can use our partial face loop selection trick by clicking on one and then shift clicking on the other, and it will select the faces in between them. Alternately, we could just select them individually, but I find it's a lot faster to click on one and shift double click on the other one, and now we've got those. All right, so let's extrude the face again. Shift right mouse down to extrude face, and we can pull that down. Tap the space bar to jump over into the mesial view so that we can see exactly how far we need to take this. And I'll just take it right to that. I wish I could remember the name of that little thing. No, I think it's the mesial marginal groove. I cheated, I looked, I think. Okay, so now we want to actually bring out the individual cusps. So instead of getting all of those, I can select one, shift select the other, and just extrude those ones separately, kind of like we did with the root. Okay, jumping back into the mesial view. We can take this one down to the end of the lingual cusp, sort of scale it in here. And then with the other one, we'll take this one again a bit further. So we'll just select the buccal cusp and extrude that once more so that we've got just one more piece here. And again, I'll go into vertex mode and kind of move these things around a bit. Not too much because we've got a lot of shaping to do in the future. So on the lingual cusp, we've just got one division here. And on the buccal cusp, we've got two divisions, or two faces, down to the cusp tip. And in the side view, we could sort of scale these, or sorry, in the lingual view, we could scale those out and then scale these cusp tips. Now you notice that the reference unfortunately doesn't line up exactly. In the mesial view, the tip of the buccal cusp is here, but in the lingual view, the tip of the buccal cusp is down here. So we just kind of have to work with what we've got. The root is a fairly easy place to start here. So I'm going to go either into Insert Edge Loop tool or the Multi-Cut tool, since they both kind of function in a similar way to insert edge loops. But I'm going to go into the Insert Edge Loop and just add 1, 2, 3 sort of divisions in the one root, and then 1, 2, 3 in the other. And then in our mesial view, we can just spend a little bit of time in vertex mode kind of shaping the roots. So I'm just kind of going along them bit by bit and getting the shapes approximately correct for these roots. I can maybe bring these ones in the sort of the cleft out and up a little bit, so it's more of a smooth arc, like so. And at this point, we've kind of diverged from symmetry. We're not treating this tooth as a symmetrical object. We're not going to just model one side and then mirror it over, because it's not a symmetrical object. So we're going to treat the asymmetry with the respect it deserves and work on both sides. Okay, so in this view here, we can maybe go up to the lingual side and maybe scale in some of these things. Looks like it's pretty sort of linear, except for the tip. We've got kind of comes together like so. So if we hit 3 again, we can see that we're sort of making some progress with the roots. Now, it might be tempting to work in smooth mesh preview mode. You might want to be selecting these vertices and kind of pushing them around while you're remaining in this smooth mode. And that's okay, but I recommend staying in unsmoothed mode, working in unsmoothed mode, and then just from time to time, just checking how things are looking with the smooth version. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's just faster for your computer to deal with. There's a lot more calculations happening, and if you've got complex geometry, then your viewport's going to slow down, and it's going to slow down your modeling, especially as the history builds up on your model. The other reason is that as you add resolution, the shape is going to become more and more like your unsmoothed model, and so it's important to make sure that your unsmoothed model is still holding the proper shape. Because when you smooth something at a low resolution, let's see if we can see this here a little bit, it's actually going to be shrunk in to your, it's going to sort of shrink as a whole. But as you add resolution, those shapes are going to be more and more supported, and you're going to be wanting to shape things to match your reference in the unsmoothed version. So that's my recommendation for working. Okay, so let's talk about a tricky area of anatomy. I'm going to go into the occlusal view. I'm actually going to hide our geometry for a sec. I'll just hit H or Control H and just hide our tooth so that we can take a look at this occlusal anatomy. Now, I told you that it was a good idea to draw your topology over top of your reference, and so I'm going to kind of do that here. So drawing in the Maya viewport, there is a tool that you can use to do that. It's called the grease pencil. And so View, Camera Tools, Grease Pencil tool. It's this little add-in that's been added to Maya, and this will allow you to sort of draw over top. So in order to make this work properly, I need to turn off X-ray mode. Otherwise, it's going to, if I leave X-ray mode, then things are going to come in quite faintly. And so that's not as good. And I'm also going to make this just a really bright color so that you guys can see what's going on. So with this grease pencil tool created, I am going to I can just draw over the viewport a little bit. I think, let's see. Okay, I'm going to use the thicker marker pencil thing. Oh, let's see how this one, yeah. Let me use the marker. Okay, so there are two cusp tips. One, the lingual cusp tip and the buccal cusp tip. And there are these kind of ridges and grooves around the tooth that are important for us to consider. If I jump over into this view, we can kind of see a little bit better. It's, again, with anything that you're modeling in 3D space, if you have an actual physical model, it's going to be so much easier to understand your reference. And so I'm just kind of going off, I'll probably get quite a few things wrong, but I'm kind of going off of the lecture that I talked about before about this premolar anatomy and the reference images. So we want to make sure that we have topology to sort of support this ridge coming up to the tip. There's also these grooves inside in the middle of the tooth, this central groove here, and it actually splits here and here and here and here in these sort of developmental grooves, I think they are. So it's important for our topology to be able to support that so that we have these kind of shapes that we can work with. There's also, I think this is called a triangular ridge. That's just this ridge that comes out from the tip of the cusp down into this groove, and another ridge that's out here. The buccal cusp also has these kind of 3 lobes to it that are developmentally based. And so if we can get a topology that supports that, that's also going to help us. Whoops. So one thing you'll notice with the grease pencil tool is that the marks that you make on it are actually tied to your camera. They're not tied to anything in your scene. So if you accidentally move your camera, you can hit the bracket keys to undo your move. So the left bracket, square bracket, is undo the camera move, and the right square bracket is the redo camera move. So it's the camera movements exist on a separate undo cue. So that's just something, a note to make. The other thing that if you want to lock the camera in place, the other thing that you can do is just select the camera with this little camera icon, or you can go view select camera, so that it's the occlusal orthographic camera that's selected. And then you can add a keyframe in the outliner, or sorry, in the channel box. And we're not talking about animation yet, but if you select the channels, right click and go key selected, what that means is that if I inadvertently move the camera around and then I just move the timeline, it's going to snap to that, back to that position. The zoom of the orthographic camera seems to be tied not to the translate and rotate channels, but to, okay, well, it doesn't really matter too much. Anyways, the point is that when you're using the grease tool, if you move the camera inadvertently, then you're going to lose the alignment with your marks. So the other thing, the other feature that the tooth has is these sort of ridges on the outside of the tooth. So we've got distal marginal ridge, mesial marginal ridge. We've got the buccal, the tip of the buccal cusp, the tip of the lingual cusp. We've got these distal lingual cusp ridge, and basically a lot of stuff. We've got these triangular fossas. A lot of anatomy packed into this one area, and the whole point of this is that we want to make sure that we have edges and edge loops that we're able to make that are going to support our ability to add detail into those areas. If I hit Control-Shift-H to unhide my object, or alternately I can go back into the outliner and select the P-cube and hit Shift-H to unhide it. Currently, there's nowhere near the topology that we need over here to create the geometry that we need to, the details that we need to. And even if we inserted like a whole bunch of edge loops this way and this way and this way, no matter how many edge loops we add, it's still existing in this kind of grid-like fashion, and it's not really going to give us a clean mesh that we're going to be able to add in the topology that we want to. So I'm going to undo that. We're going to see how we can cut new edges and new faces in here that are going to help us create the geometry that we want